it is still going to be. Sometimes you just have to jump off the bridge and build a parachute on the way down. I know that, as a younger person, that had a slightly different connotation, but, there are going to be so many things that we don't know the answers to. There are going to be so many opportunities that don't have a clear end zone with them. And we've got to go out, we got to do these things anyway. Now, the cool thing about having a relationship with God is, you get to test your faith. Like Martin Luther King said, it's like we get to, start walking up the stairs without knowing what's going to be at the top. And it's a beautiful thing. I find it to be a beautiful thing. But when we play it safe, we're not living up to our potential. Because we are created to influence other people, we're not doing that job of influencing others. We're not serving at the level that we could.
Hey, Uncommon Leaders, welcome back. This is the Uncommon Leader Podcast, and I'm your host, John Gallagher. A few months back, I had the privilege of being on my next guest podcast, The Relentless Pursuit of Winning, and today we're bringing him on the other side of the microphone. It's my turn to interview Rick Meekins, entrepreneur, strategist, and media producer, are titles that he adds right alongside of podcast host. Rick is a leader who blends hard systems thinking with faith-based principles, focusing on accountability, performance, and deep purpose, and he's here today to show us how to cut through the digital noise and stand out in an AI world without losing our souls. So let's jump into this great conversation. Rick Meekins, welcome to the Uncommon Leader Podcast. How you doing today?
Doing well, John. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Hey, it's going to be a great conversation. I mentioned in the introduction I was on your podcast just a few months back, and I appreciate sitting on this side of the microphone and putting you under the spotlight, so to speak, and asking questions today. So we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to pull a quote directly off your website that I just found fascinating. A lot of what happens in business is luck, but you have to create the conditions for luck. If you don't have the right bait and don't throw your pole in the water, only Jesus Christ is going to show up with fish. Tell me about that quote. Where'd that come from to you? What does that mean to you as you put that on there? It's like front and center on your website.
It's important to know, my experience has been, you'll sometimes do all the right things, you know what I'm saying? And they don't necessarily produce the results that you're looking for. But if you don't do anything, there's a good chance that nothing is going to happen. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I think about the stories where fishing and, they're out there all night and they're doing all of the right things. And it wasn't until Jesus said, hey, throw your net on the other side of the boat that they actually caught fish. Yeah. I think it's such a beautiful story because, there are so many things that we do in business. There's all the block and tackle things that we do. You know what I'm saying? And I've found time and time again where I stopped struggling. I stopped, doing all the things and really, said, hey, God, you know what? I need to step back. I need to surrender. I need to let you, lead the way, and then things started to change. It wasn't necessarily overnight, but things started to change. I started to see things differently. And the truth is, bottom line is, God was able to use me versus me just, trying to push my way through.
Love that. I love that in the story, especially, the story in the Bible. And then ultimately that we have to act, and it's all the way through. Paul in Scripture tells us all the time, can't just stand around and watch. We got to do some stuff too to make things happen and not necessarily wait on him to do it for us. So thanks for sharing that. So I love that quote at the start, even before I jump into my traditional first question, but we'll go back there and I'll take you back in time just a little bit as I ask all my first time guests to tell me a story from their childhood that still impacts who they are today as a person or as a leader.
Wow. I think the biggest thing my mother told me, I have no actual, firsthand recollection of that. I was a young guy and I had a bike with training wheels on it. Right. And, it was like, I don't know if you remember the old training wheels with like, if you lean so far, they would.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They're bending out. Yeah. Depending on how big. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So then, so I had that for a while and I got kind of bored of it because, in my thinking, it's like, every time I go to make a turn, I have to stand up, I have to keep the bike upright and it just doesn't work. Right. So I got my dad. I said, Dad, can you take the training wheels off? And Dad's like, oh, do you think you can ride? I'm like, yeah, I can ride. And so he takes the training wheels off. And my mother says that I rode up and down the street trying to figure out how to ride this thing over and over and over again. And I didn't quit until I was able to ride. She said that tenacity that I showed, really impressed her. And this is something that's always carried with me. It's like, when I start to do things, when I, go after a project. When I'm leading my teams, it's always like, okay, go. We fall off sometimes. We lose our balance sometimes. Get off track sometimes. But it's like, okay, let's right the ship and let's keep going. And it's just over and over again. I had my consulting business for 20 years. And we had serious up and downs. We had, very, very painful moments. We had very, great highs. But, I think that same tenacity, and my mother's coaching me in that, just saying that to me is really part of what enabled me to go for 20 years.
You said it too, and that feeds right into both your core values. Number 6, relentless pursuit of winning, which is also the title of your podcast. The relentless pursuit of winning speaks right into that word, relentless. All the way back to that, I'm going to do it until I figure out how to do it. I may get some bumps and bruises along the way in terms of not using the training wheels, but it's time and being persistent. And when you've coached other individuals, what's the biggest battle they're facing internally, do you think, that you hear where they keep that relentless pursuit going on? What are they running into?
I find that sometimes it's beliefs. You work with business owners as well. I mean, it's so often we can see more in the people that we work with than they can sometimes see in themselves. We see the path, we see all the obstacles, we see all the opportunities. And sometimes just by saying, hey, we need to do this is going to be to your benefit, it doesn't necessarily hit them right away. I think one of the things that I've experienced, though, is going back and repeating the same story, later. So we get a little bit more, water under the bridge, so to speak. We build a little bit more trust. And I say, hey, let's revisit this conversation from a few months ago, because I think there's still opportunity here. I think that this is something that is really going to enable you to tell a story that people are going to remember, going forward. And this is important.
Well, I think it's so good, because even as you think of, again, going back to your childhood story again, even as you think about what you've had to share with others with regards to overcoming. You mentioned, in 20 years of consulting, and you've had ups and downs in that space on your own. I've been in this, at least entrepreneurial world for just a little over 6 or almost 6 years now, in the ups and downs of consulting and coaching and trying to find sales and trying to find clients and continuing on. And those beliefs that may be sometimes limiting beliefs that pop up inside our heads that can keep us from doing that. Being able to remember the hard stories as well, where you did overcome, is so important to make that happen. And I think that's what makes some of the best consultants and coaches are the ones that have experienced that themselves throughout life and overcome that and are able to share their stories to really make that happen. Now, you talk about that, in your business with regards to having a clear message. And a lot of times, again, in our entrepreneurial world, if we listen to many of the marketing folks who are talking online, they're saying, hey, you got to put out more content, you got to do this, you got to do that. But you believe that clarity, the message, is actually more important than the volume of the message that's out there. So how do you work with folks to get their message clear before they move into this volume space?
It's really a process, because, the first thing that we have to do is we have to realize that, and I apologize to anybody out here that takes offense to this, sometimes we sell authority just for the sake of authority. You know what I'm saying? We say something, we stand behind it. Hey, you've got to post 5 times a day across every platform, and you say it over and over. You say it enough times, people are going to believe that. Mm-hmm. So first thing we have to do is we have to overcome that. We have to understand that, especially as smaller companies, our businesses are really extensions of ourselves. So our personality, the way that we work with customers, et cetera, this is reflected into what we might call our brand personality. Okay. And so that means that every story needs to be different, because there's going to be a group of people. There is going to be a market segment that is going to appeal directly to your particular story. If you're the guy like me, that would, be daring and ride down a hill in roller skates and, try to do a jump and fall and burn, there's a group of people that say, hey, you know what, I like working with entrepreneurs that are kind of on the edge, those that'll take a risk, those will take an educated risk because I need to push my company further. But there are other people that are going to say, hey, I need to work with a more conservative consultant. Somebody that's going to say, hey, you know what, these are the individual steps we need to take. This is the backup plan, and this is the backup plan for the backup plan. If we are authentic in telling our stories, if we go in deep and really really understand our customers, our real customers, who they are, what challenges they have, what fears they have, what their goals are, et cetera, we're able to tell a compelling story that will attract the right bait.
No, I think that's so good. That's how you think about that, Rick. Apologize, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. What resonates with me as you say that is too many times as entrepreneurs, we try to satisfy everybody. We diverge and we try to satisfy everybody. And as a result, we don't satisfy anybody. So if we can recognize who we really want to connect with, whether you call that an avatar or whether you call that your perfect client or whatever you end up calling that, and you can talk to them based on your experience, I think you're right. I think you do have a much better chance of being successful. Now, in the world that we live at today, I know you touched on this, you said, how do we continue to live with people-centered integrity, being in integrity with our story in a marketplace that leads with all kind of disruptions, especially in the world we live in today with regards to AI. And we could simplify all of our social media strategy and overburden people with content just by using AI. In fact, videos, I don't know if anybody really knows if it's you and I talking or not. It might be our AI avatars that are talking as well, but how do you maintain that integrity in that world that we live in?
And I'm really glad you asked that because, I've been asking that question to other marketers as well. And one of the things that came out of the conversation I had yesterday that really impressed on me, and it really built on what I was thinking anyway, is that authenticity. And it's not just the one time, but it's consistent. So, as you were saying earlier, we've got to be able to always tell the truth so that we're connecting with our core audience in a way that is authentic. When they launch like agentic search, for example, that agentic search is going to get to know you as a user. And when you're going out and looking for things, it's going to connect you with the authentic voices that actually connect with you. Because frankly, they want to be a trusted source of information for you. So if you're not trusted, if you're not sending the same message out consistently to the same market, you're not going to get the results that you're looking for.
So there's that balance all the time that we as leaders have to face, especially as entrepreneurs have to face. We need efficiency, and AI will make us more efficient if we use it correctly. But we also want to maintain that human touch point that exists inside that space. So how are you doing that today? How are you using AI to help you be a little bit more efficient, but also maintain the personal touch that you need to as a consultant or as a coach?
Well, I think we have to look at AI as what it is. It's a resource. It's kind of like, when we were growing up, we had encyclopedias, and we would go to the library and we would get information from there. And, if we copied that information, we plagiarized the information. We didn't know what the information was to begin with. B, we might have gotten in trouble for plagiarizing the information. AI aggregates information on a massive level. It doesn't necessarily mean that the information is correct. It doesn't mean that it's going to have the depth that it would have if a human wrote it. And so we need to look at AI from that perspective. And that's, just kind of the surface level. There are, agents that we can create that help to make us work more efficiently, that save steps. And we've been doing this like through tools like, Zapier and that sort of thing. We're automating, but we're automating on a more complex level. So we have to look at things for at the way that they are, not the way that we wish they would be. We can't get mad at ChatGPT because it's giving us, not giving us the answer that we want. We have to remember it's a computer, it's a robot. It's not necessarily, It's not a human. It doesn't read into and understand, what we're thinking. It's working on algorithms. It's working on statistics. It's not working on, hey, this is a human brain. We're creating new information.
Love that. And I love that, just talking about it, using it as a tool. It's one of those things that some will use it as the primary method for all of their communication. It just can't be that way. And folks will figure that out. And unfortunately, sometimes they don't figure that out until after you're working with them, but they'll realize that you don't have some of the knowledge, wisdom that you claim to have through all those things, and see that it's AI. And again, I think just, as we record this today, some of the things that are going on with SpaceX and helping the other AI companies out right now with regards to speed, and they're going to go to market and be a $1.7 trillion in IPO. It's one of those things that, man, it's here. It's not necessarily going anywhere. And so we have to learn to manage that. Now, in your space, Rick, and again, I've seen this even on your LinkedIn profile, which I really appreciate, faith and faith-based principles are very important to you. How are you integrating your faith-based principles into your work and into your communication as well?
I think it's really important for us to maintain, enhance those human-to-human connections. I saw something yesterday where I think it was an ad somewhere, and they were talking about how people are using like ChatGPT for their faith-based conversations and, for counseling and that sort of thing. And it's like, I think to a certain degree, that's kind of directional, but it's not necessarily going to be substantial enough for us to really make good decisions with it. I think that, with our work at Polaris Story, the idea is to help people tell these stories, bring us back together, help us to communicate, help us to think again. I mean, this is what God created us for. We're a unique creation. There's nothing on the earth that is as fascinating as the human being. But we're losing that, or we're starting to lose that, between, just being isolated. Everybody's working from home and they're not going anywhere. They're not doing anything. Communication is down to, 3-minute bites, 1-minute bites, and it's just for dopamine rushes. How do we get real information? How do we truly honor God with the creation that he's made? How do we use that? How do we really develop and expand that creativity? To honor God through that. I mean, think about the idea that, God made Adam, and Adam was to name all the animals. God wanted Adam to use his creativity to name all the animals. And God sat back and said, wow, that's cool. That's cool. I didn't realize this was going to be a rhino, but this is cool. That's a great name. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think creativity, Michael Jackson said it, Prince said it, creativity is like one of the highest gifts we can give back to God.
So good. And even as a leader, to delegate that task to someone who he knew was going to fail him anyway. Do you think about that? Hey, go ahead and name all the animals. I'm going to make them, but you can go ahead and give them a name. That's a lot of trust that has to exist in a relationship standpoint with someone to be able to delegate that important responsibility too. And again, I appreciate that. I think you've made that very clear in all of your material, in your website, on your LinkedIn profile, Instagram area, and things like that. And I pull this quote directly off your LinkedIn profile. I value my relationship with God above all others, and I am not perfect. I am intentional. Tell me about intentional, and how are you intentional today as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a man? I
mean, I recognize that God is the supreme architect. He's the conductor. It's his story ultimately that we're part of. And I find that going my own way, doesn't really benefit me, doesn't benefit the kingdom, doesn't benefit God. I prefer to be in alignment with God. And so we'll find that, like, even before this podcast, I sat down for a few minutes and I'm like, God, I want this show to impact lives. I want this show I want to honor you, in being here. And I do that through all of my shows, and I do that through my conversations. I do that in the morning, when I'm getting out of bed. I still, say my prayers before I, go to bed and, when I get up in the morning. And I think that that's important because I always want to, cover the people that I love. I always want to represent that. I always want to be even, open with them about that. I was like, hey, Amy, I prayed for you today, and you know what? It just lifts her up, at the very least. But it also, shows that intentionality. It's like, hey, I care about you as a being, as one of, God's daughters. I want you to be able to overcome whatever obstacle you're facing. So that's really, really important to me. It's become, and as I get older, it's just like, it's almost like, what else is there,
That's funny. Older. I listened to you on a couple other podcasts, and a lot of folks said they refer to you as seasoned. I think you and I are both pretty seasoned in our ways. That maybe that sounds better than old. Are you tired of being tired? I know I was. That's when I was glad to find Own It Coaching. Now my resting heart rate's down 20%. Sleep quality up 300%. I just ran my first Spartan race at age 56. I feel better than I ever have. So if you're ready to stop settling and start owning your own health, go to CoachJohnGallagher.com/own it and set up a free call with the Own It coaching team. That's CoachJohnGallagher.com/own it. Now, let's get back to the episode. Or whatever that means with regard, or goes back in decades and things like that. But look, we've all had folks who have influenced us. Have you had specific mentors that have influenced you on your journey over the last decades throughout your life, in your business or other spaces?
It's been interesting because it's always been I haven't really had the I've always wanted, I think, a mentor or mentors, and I've had people, just individually, that popped in and, just gave me, little breadcrumbs here and there. I think I would say the person that's been most influential to me, just in terms of the way that I work has been my mother. She's started out a teacher in, I think, Pemberton or Cherry Hill in New Jersey, and she rose to be an administrator. And she was so impactful that when she decided to retire, they put an article in the paper about it on the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is 2-inch thick newspaper. It was just incredible, and it was it's the way that she impacted people's lives, the way that she cared about people, the way that she made excellence the standard, the way that she stopped and listened, the way that she, these are things that, most of it was caught. She didn't walk around, with, as an authoritarian, but, she just demonstrated, a level of excellence that really played into like my entire career. I can look back to the restaurant industry and just think about, not just how we did what we did in terms of the food that we created and served, but how we treated each other and how we treated customers. Building the consulting agency, it's like, how do we make people feel good, feel seen? How do we make sure that they're, getting what they want? I didn't know, for most of my career that, hey, I was striving for excellence, but, other people saw the pattern. I was just like, wow, I remember, specifically there was a report on the 50 states that I had to write when I was, in elementary school, I think. And I did the first version of it. And my mom was just like, no, this doesn't look good. This isn't good enough. And she made me do the entire 50 states, all over again. And that becomes the standard. That story plays over and over in my head. Would my mom say that this is okay?
You said that word too, that standard was there. That's the word that came in my mind when she said it's not up to the level of expectation that you're capable of. What is the standard? First, I love that moms are influences in our lives all that time through. Secondly, what you said that really should be inspiring to leaders is that, in essence, you catch what you're shown. She modeled that behavior. It may not have been a formal book or a lesson that she sat down and taught you or things like that, but she modeled that behavior and you picked it up and frankly didn't even realize it until maybe others pointed that out to you as well in that journey. That's great. You also mentioned Polaris story, and if I say that incorrectly, you can correct me, but that's a new company for you, a new venture. Tell me a Polaris story. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I'm really excited about Polaris story. It goes into the conversation about stories. I worked with a lot of different businesses, over the years. And, when you walk into a group, walk into a networking room and, there's 10 consultants at the table and they're saying the same thing. Hey, I'm a growth consultant. I help, small businesses, get to the next level. It's just like, what are we doing here? You know what I mean? And then the worst part about it is, truth be told, you leave that room, you've forgotten everybody. But think about Jesus' approach. Jesus used stories, and those stories, the stories in the Bible are memorable. Yes. We don't forget them, and we apply them in our lives. Sometimes not even thinking about it. And that's such a beautiful thing. And I think that as business owners, as businesses, as companies, as organizations, we all have stories to tell. We have stories to tell that help our audiences truly understand, what we're about, who we serve, why we do what we do, what our vision for the future is. And so the first part, the primary goal with Polaris Stories is to help people create those stories. The second part of it is to help them tell those stories. So what we use is one-time podcasts. So it might be like we'll create a show that's branded for the company that we're serving, and we'll interview them about their story. So it's not just, hey, my name is blah, 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 I do this for this, that, it becomes a little bit more in depth. Why do you do this? What inspired you? Who did you see? What problems are you really, really solving for the people that you serve? And what makes them special? Why this particular market segment? We can go in a little bit deeper in those conversations than we typically go. The second way we do this is we do live events. And a live event is like a podcast, similar format, but what we'll do is we'll bring in an audience, and we'll let the audience also interact while we tell these stories. We help our client tell these stories in a much larger way. And then in both of those cases, we create additional marketing materials and allow them to use that to help to continue to promote their company. And the third piece of that is, when we have a story, sometimes we need to get that story out to a larger audience. So we help create podcasts for companies. So if we had, there was an organization that approached us, and they wanted to solve a problem that we have, a large scale problem that we have in this country, but not everybody in this country understood the problem. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to create podcasts to help educate the general public about the problem. And so this would be an example of how we are able to help, expand a story. So it's not just the story of, hey, there's a problem in this country, but hey, we need to inform the country about these problems. So this is what we
generate that reason for action. Love that. I love that as a model, helping them tell their stories through a podcast, and then ultimately helping them identify and create that reason for action in a space they need to tell a story. And yes, you're spot on. I mean, Jesus told parables all through the New Testament where he was using those for great teaching points, and storytelling is so important. Is there one, or short period of time, is there one that kind of sticks out that you've enjoyed putting together without maybe sharing anything confidential you don't want to, but working with folks?
It was that healthcare company it's really interesting. I mean, I can't really go into details with it, because I think that the approach that we took was really unique. But I think that the opportunity that's created around this particular project is one that would make a significant impact, for people, across the country. I mean, the problem that we're challenging is one that I would say, most Americans, are dealing with, and most Americans probably hate. And it's something that, we've been talking about heavily for at least the past, 20 or 30 years. So, I mean, whenever we have a problem like that, I definitely want to get in and, get my hands dirty. I mean, if we, I would love to do like some environmental projects, with somebody that is, with companies, organizations that are, saying, hey, this is a problem. We talk about like the microplastics and that sort of thing. It's like, it's kind of, on the fringe, people talk about it, on a higher level, or food, people talk about it on a higher level, but it's just like, what does it really mean? Who are the people that are really having the conversations, and where can we get real data, real verifiable data, so that we can make really good decisions?
I think it's really cool. Again, I've not heard of that type of business model before. Helping to write the vision, there's organizations that help you do that. But using the platform of a podcast to both share the vision and also identify and a problem so that people will act on it is really cool. You go back to your creative juices in that, Rick. I can feel it. Your Michael Jackson and Prince inside of you that are making those things happen. You have to do that all the time, and we have to have those unique questions on podcasts to try and draw those stories out from individuals. As the host of the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast, is there a favorite question that you like to ask to get that out of folks and really get them to tell their story?
The question that I ask people at the end of every show, you didn't get the question. It came after you. But, the name of the show obviously is the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast. And it's very easy to define what winning looks like. But the hard part is maintaining that relentless pursuit. And so the question I always ask my guests is, what would you educate to someone, or what would you suggest to someone in order to help them maintain that relentless pursuit after, whatever their goal is? That's my favorite question. I've got some really, really brilliant, really, really creative responses to that.
Love that as a question. You may hear that here again before we hang up. I want to ask you something pretty specific and fun to learn more about you. You a baseball fan at all? Being down there in Atlanta, Braves fan, they're doing so well this year.
I'm not.
You're not?
I always say I was a player. I hate watching sports.
Fair enough. But Michael Jackson and Prince maybe have influenced you. What would be your karaoke song that you'd be singing, Rick? You're out with friends on a Friday evening, and they put a microphone up inside, and you're like, hey, go sing a karaoke song, Rick. What are you going to sing?
I'm probably going to sing, what is that song? Of course, I can't remember the name of the song.
Sing it for us, and we'll figure it out. I'll see if I can name that tune.
It's a hard song to sing, too. Oh, wow. I can't remember the name of it. Let's see. Let's pick another one. Hootie and the Blowfish, Only Want to Be With You.
I love that. So, yeah, I'm glad. Okay, I just listened to and shared a song, Hootie and the Blowfish, or a Darius Rucker song with my brother yesterday. He was working on a little project and shared it with him to pick his spirits up just a little bit. Nice. I love me some Darius Rucker. Hootie and the Blowfish, 1993 or 4, I went to see them in concert. Wow. Goodness gracious. There we go, back in the seasoned world again, Rick. Thanks for sharing that. The reason I was asking about baseball is like, what would your walk-up song be? You're getting ready to go up to bat. What would be the song they would play for you to be coming up to bat? So no worries there. Hey, how do folks get in touch with you, Rick? I want to honor your time. We're coming up on some things. How do folks get in touch with you? Where you want them to go to learn more about you?
You know what? My landing page, rickmeekins.com, is a really good place. You can see all of, a lot of what I'm working on. If you want to email directly, you can email me at rick@polarisstory, POLARISTORY.com. That's going to be the easiest thing to do. My podcast is RPOW podcast.com, where people can go and check out the shows. And it's on LinkedIn and YouTube and Spotify and all that good stuff. So, yeah, I'd love to hear from anybody about
I'll put those things in the show notes, make sure folks can get to them. Rick, I just got kind of two more questions. When I think about what you talked about with regards to your question, maintaining that relentless pursuit, I think it's a gap, it's a barrier that many leaders face today, whether it's in business, in their homes, and building their faith. Maintaining that relentless pursuit, the barrier is complacency or good enough. Hey, I'm doing good enough, but as certainly as men of faith, we know that we were called to more than that. Okay, so how do you? I sometimes call it the day 76 effect kind of thing. Like we do 75 hard to keep us in shape get us in shape for 75 days. What are we supposed to do on day 76? How do we keep that going, kind of thing? How do you maintain that relentless pursuit? How are you doing it, Rick, to make sure that you're continuing to add value to others and grow yourself?
Foundationally, it's discipline. It's the learning to do the same things, over and over again. It's removing the emotional component from it. I go to the gym every day at 5 o'clock. I don't think, hey, do I feel like going to the gym? I don't say, hey, you know what, I'm sore, I'm not going to the gym. It's like, okay, this is where I go. If I walk out of the house, I'm probably going to end up at the gym without even thinking about it. This is important, but it's the same thing with the business. At 8 o'clock, I'm sitting at my desk and I'm doing the things that I need to do. It's that discipline of being able to be in the right place regardless of how you feel is really, really important for us to get anything done in life. The other piece to that is accountability. And I look at accountability to my Creator. I think about the story of the talents, where we had the three people that had the talents, the 10, the 7, and the 3. And I always think it's just like, okay, God invested, all of this, invested 55 years in me, training, et cetera, et cetera. What do I need to give him back? How do I honor that? Because if you think about it, God put a lot of trust into us to be vocal, to influence other people, to get the word out, about our faith, about work, et cetera, et cetera. It's a huge responsibility. When I look at it like that, I know I've got work to do. I know I have work to do until the day I die.
Yes, you do. Yes, we do. Thank you for sharing that with regards to that relentless. So the discipline and accountability. And I love that every day at 5 o'clock, I think about that. I don't care how you feel, right? We can not feel well, but the discipline and accountability is we got to be there. That's doing it even when we don't want to do it is that absolute definition of discipline. Thank you for sharing. Rick, this has been a great conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know I have one more question. It's my ending question for the Uncommon Leader podcast, but I'm going to give you a billboard. You're in that Atlanta area. You can put it anywhere you want to. A lot of people are going to see it. But, for those entrepreneurs, for those leaders, for those individuals who are looking for that inspirational message, on that billboard, what's the message you're going to put for them, and why do you put it there?
It is still going to be, sometimes you just have to jump off the bridge and build a parachute on the way down. I know that, as a younger person, that had a slightly different connotation, but, there are going to be so many things that we don't know the answers to. There are going to be so many opportunities that don't have a clear end zone with them. And we've got to go out. We got to do these things anyway. Now, the cool thing about having a relationship with God is, you get to test your faith. Like Martin Luther King said, it's like we get to start walking up the stairs without knowing what's going to be at the top. It's a beautiful thing. I find it to be a beautiful thing. But when we play it safe, we're not living up to our potential. We're not, and because we are created to influence other people, we're not doing that job of influencing others. We're not serving at the level that we could. So jump off the bridge. It's going to be all right.
Excellent. Hey, Rick, this has been fun. Thank you so much for sharing your message with listeners of the Uncommon Leader podcast. I wish you the best with Polaris story and all the other endeavors you go forward with. So thanks again.
Thanks, John, so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Wow, such a good message from Rick Meekins. I truly enjoyed that conversation today. I know that you did as well. Some of the things that stood out to me, and especially at the very end, was the message about discipline and accountability and how that was so important to him with regards to being relentlessly pursuing that winning. And certainly his message at the end, take a leap, jump off the bridge, build that parachute on the way down. That's quite an interesting picture, but we got to have faith. We got to take that first step and show others how to be courageous in their space. Hey, if you heard something on this podcast that you know someone who needs to hear it, please share it with them. That'd be great. That's how we get it into the hands of more uncommon leaders just like you. And if you get a chance, if you haven't already, please drop us a 5-star review on the platform that you listen. It's just another way, that we continue to grow this audience of uncommon leaders and making a difference. So until next time, go and grow champions.